for sure.
And other than the sailing game that Microfoot did, Helms.
Sailing. Oh, yeah.
America's
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about it.
yeah, it was
As far as I could see, Beam was producing mountains of product,
Yeah.
and John wasn't producing any product.
yeah.
And we still to this day don't know how he stayed in business so long, because there's only like Fallout Tactics or something, and there was a little scorched earth thing he did.
Yeah, Fire King or something.
Yeah, it was pretty ordinary. So yeah, I couldn't work out what he was producing and how he stayed in business, but he did. It was weird. So I don't know how much I can say really about the other part of Beam, which was, it was owned by Fred and his wife, or maybe she was a director then dropped out of it. The business went pretty bad at one point, and Greg Barnett and Adam Lansman both bought into the company. And that's how Adam was actually the accountant. And then about a year or so later, Greg Barnett left and he went to the UK to stay. And he had his own company there called Perfect Entertainment or something. So that's how they sort of broke away. And then it was just Fred and Adam.
Right.
And then that went for several years with, you know, Adam being Fred's kind of partner. And then they swapped, and Adam became the CEO and Fred took a sort of more of a back seat. But I think he was occupying himself more with the R&D side of things and ideas kind of stuff. And then he got into, you know, famous faces, technology and all that sort of thing. So he was kind of trying to do the visionary thing, whereas Adam was getting on with the day-to-day operation of the studio. And then they floated a part of the company to raise the money basically to become publishers again. And I had lunch with Fred and I asked him about all that stuff. He said essentially they couldn't get distribution. So even if we produce projects here in Australia, they won't get the distribution mainly. So that was what killed the KK&D thing. What it really needs is institutional money, in my view.
And that will help with the distribution as well?
It needs a muscle, and it needs an Australian muscle, because unless we fire up somebody like Packer or Macquarie Bank or somebody who can underwrite it to $50 million or so, it's not going anywhere in terms of the publishing side of things. And unless we get a publisher here who has Australian interests at heart and Australian profits at heart, we're just exporting. You know, we talk about export income in terms of the game development, but, you know, if we produce a game, for instance, we did Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four sold to date over 300,000 copies, maybe 400,000 nearly. Well, at $10 a copy, I mean, that's $4 million. And we had 400K of export income, you know? And then we congratulate ourselves we got 400K, but the Americans have just turned over 4 million.
Yeah.
And, you know, Activision's now the second biggest publisher in the world. And EA's now turning over 4 billion a year. And if you talk to them, you'd think that they were down to the, you know, poor old publisher. They're such a crap business. Greg Fishback's publicly published salary for Acclaim at the time was $8 million a year. So, you know, they were making plenty, but all that is, to me, unearned export income. You know, we're actually congratulating ourselves on less than 10% when we should be looking at the full picture, and that will generate a colossal number of jobs and huge income, and then the government really would be interested in the game industry if they could produce that sort of income. So.
But there aren't any Australian publishers,
No,
are there?
and there's no big.
Publishers are all just offices of internationals.
Well, you've got to ask yourself why the institutions here in Australia are watching the rest of the world get involved with the game industry and have done nothing whatsoever. You know, why is Packer and all the others haven't started a games publishing company
Yeah.
to participate in this global phenomenon? You know, but they've got nothing going on. Roadshow, we were talking to them a few years ago, but they were going. I think they blew 30 million on some crummy local project where that could have been put into setting up a game company, and we'd be, you know, turning over quite a few million.
Yeah.
Even modest-sized publishers are turning over hundreds of millions of dollars. There's not one company anywhere close to Australia that's getting anywhere near that. So it confuses me, you know. On the bigger picture, the Fortune 500 companies were all about digging something out of the ground and making it into something. Well, today, 50% of those companies are all about intellectual property and software, you know, and we're sitting back watching it happen in Australia, still got this dig it out the ground mentality. It's completely weird because it's got this digital age that we live in, and we're taking a back seat on the profits that can be made from it,
Yeah.
you know.
A lot of talent goes overseas.
Yeah, totally. It's gone. It's bizarre. Well, doctors and all that are doing that now, aren't they? They're all going overseas for more money, and we really need to be getting those salaries here in Australia. You know, we need to be paying 150 grand for a top engineer or game designer, because the billions are in game design, not in programming.
Yeah.
Programming is just implementation, but game design is, you know, the guys who, they're the authorship
Yeah.
part of it, where we create inspired ideas and so on.
It's intriguing though, actually, because you would think that the Packers and the Murdochs, for example, would be interested in something like this. Is it why
I don't know.
maybe something positioned in such a way that's so intuitive or easy for them to understand as something that's locally existing?
Mm,
You know, that already the infrastructure's here as opposed to having to start the infrastructure.
absolutely.
The government's seen it.
So what we're doing is we're seeing THQ buying up local companies, and, you know, Midway, and now Perception's gone down, and
Destroying.
yeah, it's just wiping us out. And then it's because they're coming here for cheap labour. They're not coming here to provide export income, that's for sure. You know, it's just cheap labour. In Montreal, if we go and set up a studio in Montreal, they pay 50% of the staff salaries for 10 years. So
The
that's
government does that.
yeah, that's a colossal. And you know, from a business guy point of view, you think you need to be a nut not to set up in Montreal. You know, so for business people to want to stay in Australia and in Victoria and all that, there really needs to be a business outcome instead of holding us at the brink of bankruptcy because of, you know, the cost of compliance and the, you know, the employment rules and all this sort of stuff that is introduced to us. You know, just the cost of doing business. If an American guy buys a development system, he pays a certain amount of money. If we buy the same development system, we have to ship it from America and then pay a ton of duty on top of it. You know?
So it's been stymied at every section.
So everywhere we go, we're less competitive. To the extent where our prices now are up against Americans. They can get, Austin, Texas, you can get 6,000 a man-month, which is, you know, 4,000 less than average. And in Australia, we're about $500 away from the average in America. So they'll get it locally, they won't need us.
Gee, that's changed over the last 2 years, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas it used to be we could run at 6,500, 7,000 a man-month because, you know, the dollar was down at 6.5 and all that. Now it's, what, 0.7 something? Phew. Lost the price of a house out of every project. So it is difficult, and because, you know, going back to the Federation Building Society, that changed everything in Australia in terms of entrepreneurial activity, because now directors are held personally liable if their companies fail. So again, it's a very, very hostile climate for entrepreneurs. So people look at it getting into small business are driven away by the fear of of what can happen to them if things don't work out. You know, and they talk about 90% of businesses don't work out, which means if you start a new business, 90% of the chances that you're going to be wiped out. So it's an unfriendly climate in that sense as well. You know, limited liability should mean limited liability, but it doesn't. In America, it does. So they're really clamping down on, I guess, business risk, which is, you know, 90% of people are hired by small business, and the SMEs are all under pressure. You know, you got the industrial reforms are going to help, but up to now, you hire a guy, you're stuck with him, you know, and it's and that burden's on the boss the whole time, you know. If they take you to a tribunal, you automatically lose. Doesn't matter what the employee's done, you lose. You know, it's just bad. So I welcome these new reforms. I'm not in the sacking business, but I'm not in the carrying business either. So the best job security you can have in the world is actually doing a good job, doing what you get paid to do. And that's the thing that people don't want, is to be held accountable for their salary. That's why I think there's a big fuss being kicked up about it. But if you're doing a good job, bosses are not in the sacking business. In my industry, I mean, we're hunting for talent all the time. So it's not like we're trying to get rid of people. If anything, we're trying to hire people, you know. But they've got to do the job.
Sounds definitely like a lot of, excuse me, government assistance, so it sounds like it'd be more productive as well.
Yeah, then it certainly needs something,
To move it forward.
maybe not just even in the game industry, but definitely in the investor climate here. The tax breaks for investors.
Relief and R&D, there needs to be.
All that, yeah, that stuff. So that we start funding innovation. Because it's very difficult to fund innovation. If you look at something like the Commercial Ready grant, you could get 50% of the money. So if you need an R&D project, it's going to take 5 million. You've got to find 2.5. Well, it's great that you get the other 2.5, but where are you going to get 2.5 from? So one of the other governments that we come across when I was in CBIT, what they do is they give you the grant and then they credit you with the other half. So essentially you get 100% funding and then you pay the half of it cash flow. But it means you can get the full project done and up and running.
That's right.
Whereas what we do is we go in and say you've absolutely got to prove you've got that cash.
Yeah, that's right. It's really difficult.
And if you're a small business with a big idea, where do you go with it? You know? And VCs are not interested. They're worse than banks here. So the analogy I've got, and a bit cynical I guess, but in America, if you go on prospecting for gold, they'll say, now, have you got the right team? Have you done the bio on all the guys? They know what they're doing? Have you done your research? You know what the geology is about and where you're going to be digging and all? Okay, right, here's the money, right? And they go do it. Now, in Australia, the equivalent conversation would be, now, have you got the map that shows you where all the gold is? Okay, right, here's the money. And just in case it's not there, we've got your house on the line, just, you know. And that's the Australian mentality. They just don't seem to, they seem to be so risk averse. And I found that another weird statistic was in America, execs in America donate 10% of their salaries to charity. In Australia, the wealthy, 1%. Yeah.
That's less than your average Australian.
Yeah. It's this weird culture here. And one that needs to change to fit in with the global scene, I think. So overall, I think game industry is not looking at a happy future unless we can get ownership of the intellectual property. And the only way, my personal view, the only way we can do it is to have institutional money and government, which could be put together with government tax breaks for investors in R&D. So that's part of a bigger picture though, not just the games industry.
Yeah.
That's it.